Make sure you all can see and hear me. There we are. So Vanessa, Vanessa's we're having problems with her audio, and then that somehow had problems with our audio. So I'm gonna talk to her either Sunday or Monday to get her take on the latest things. But we're just gonna continue on with the show itself because there's a lot to cover, and I want to unpack a lot of things. I recently wrote an article that kind of encompasses a lot of it, but I wanted to give you guys my take because I haven't had a chance to talk about any of this really with you all, and I wanted to give you my take on the Yemen stuff. So as Vanessa was talking about, right? This is an ongoing war against Yemen. This has been a Zionist war, a US war against Yemen. They've been using the excuse of Iran to target the Ansarallah, right? And I actually did a stream with her probably a year or so ago, deep on Yemen. So I'll try to put that in the description because she goes into depth as to why Ansarallah is different than Houthis and Houthi rebels and all of that. But what's been happening in Yemen is the fact that Yemen has gone to bat for Gaza. And Yemen is an example of what I think other people should be doing is targeting Israel economically, targeting Israel in a way that hurts them, right? But even people's favorite countries like Russia and China have yet to target Israel economically or have yet to even as much as give them enough of a punishment. Everybody's still conducting their relations with Israel, their diplomatic relations with Israel. And to me, that is a problem because Israel is not going to stop, and they're being backed by the United States, by the UK, who also bombed Yemen. They're being backed by the majority of the NATO alliance. And if we could just possibly direct an economic, I guess, backfiring, some sort of retribution on Israel, then they wouldn't be able to continue doing what they're doing because what Israel is doing is backed by the United States. The United States was informed, by the way, on multiple things regarding Gaza, regarding Syria, regarding just the latest Israeli attacks, even on Lebanon. And the United States continuously backed all of this. And so, if there was a way for certain countries to say, no, we're going to put a line here and not use the whole, well, we're just not going to get involved because every country is entitled to national sovereignty except Palestine, except Yemen, except the people of these regions that we continuously devastate time and time again. So let's just start off with the first link, Jayme, that we have on here. And let me pull that up myself. So again, Yemen has targeted Israel economically, has targeted the US as well economically. And they responded to the US's 47 plus airstrikes that targeted civilians by carrying out a specific strategic military operation using 18 ballistic missiles and cruise missiles and drones. And they were targeting the US naval ships as well as the Israeli ships. So, this is when Yemen was bombed, right? This is part of what happened. And then Yemen, of course, Ansarallah responded. And this is important in the context of everything else that's happening. And I wanted to read specifically what Donald Trump said and respond to that as well, because this is another people, Yemen, fighting, right, for Gaza. This is something that everybody could emulate. Donald Trump said that today he ordered the United States military to launch decisive and powerful military action against the Houthi terrorists in Yemen. They have waged an unrelenting campaign of piracy, violence, and terrorism against American and other ships, aircraft, and drones, Joe Biden's response was pathetically weak, so the unrestrained Houthis just kept going. It has been over a year since a U.S. commercial ship safely sailed through the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, or the Gulf of Aden. The last American warship to go through the Red Sea 4 months ago was attacked by the Houthis over a dozen times, funded by Iran, which is entirely false. The Houthi thugs have fired missiles at U.S. aircraft and targeted our troops and allies. These relentless assaults have cost the U.S. and world economy many billions of dollars, while at the same time putting innocent lives at risk. No, they haven't. What's caused the U.S. many billions of dollars is the billions of dollars that go to fund Israel. And so another thing he says here, the majority of the Iranian resistance is Shia, and Yemen actually is Sunni. The majority of them, the people fighting. So you have, like, it's not even the same type of Islam, but you wouldn't know that because the majority of people don't make a differentiation. And so saying that Iran is backing is actually in charge of Yemen is a little bit, Iran backs the resistance, yes, but in terms of Iran being the puppeteer, the master behind the strings, is just entirely false, because Yemen is doing actually what a lot of people wanted Iran to do, and what a lot of people have criticized that Iran hasn't done in terms of targeting Israel in this way. Trump goes on to say that to all Houthi terrorists, your time is up and your attacks must stop starting today. If they don't, hell will rain down upon you like nothing you have ever seen before. To Iran, support for the Houthi terrorists must end immediately. Do not threaten the American people. Their president, who has received one of the largest mandates in presidential history, or worldwide shipping lanes. If you do, beware, because America will hold you fully accountable and we won't be nice about it. I mean, it sounds like an adolescent responding to world international affairs in a very childish way, like having a tantrum. And I'm not, this isn't about hating Trump or having Trump derangement syndrome. This is about somebody that ran on ending the wars, that ran on bringing peace, and simultaneously and very strategically, while talking about ending the war in Ukraine with Russia, Trump has diverted that war, as I said from the beginning, into the Middle East. And he is continuing this war on terror because Yemen is not the only thing we have been talking about. Let's go down to Gaza, Jayme, if we can head over to Gaza, because I think that this is all related and I want to make sure I get across this point. So there has been the ceasefire that people hailed. And look, as I said before, I was always for the people of Gaza having some sort of respite from the violence, from being killed every single day. But what I didn't want is what's happening now, is this resumption of the bombing of Gaza. These are people that we have grown accustomed to looking at as just wrapped up in dead bodies in these videos that we have seen. And you can go ahead and play the video, JB. You can play the first one while I talk, because it's just um gonna be, and I want people to see these images. And warning, these are graphic images, not because I'm thirsty for blood, or because people need to see this. We've seen it. We saw it for a long time on our screens for over a year. And then the ceasefire that thought was just an invitation to continue Israel's expansion is exactly that. Israel broke the ceasefire. They have blamed Hamas for it, but even Israeli media have said that they actually never intended to follow through the ceasefire. Israel also had a ceasefire with Lebanon, and they didn't follow through with that as well. When I was at Hassan Nasrallah's funeral, they were attacking in South Lebanon. They were also threatening flying their warplanes above the crowd of people that were there. And this is not something new. Israel has never seen ceasefire and respected it. We knew that going in. But the fact that they resumed and warned the United States that they would attack Gaza and the United States fully backed it means that the United States and Donald Trump and this administration have blood on their hands. And it means that we are complicit in what's happening directly, not just by supplying the weapons and by supplying the funding, but by also supplying the support, vocal and the media support that we have seen from the Trump administration. I mean, these are the numbers as of a couple days. Now the numbers are nearing more than 600 to 1,000 people. And since this is continuing, you have now even more than that. So this is an area where things are getting much, much worse. And so people are understandably upset. But what I'm trying to get across is that this is the next phase of Israel taking over. And after the fall of Syria, there isn't necessarily a, I would say, a buffer that existed before that were, for example, Syria acted as the gateway into supplying weapons for Hezbollah, into the resistance axis. And now that Syria is experiencing its own genocide with the Takfiri terrorists via HTS and other literal Al Qaeda functions, then Syria is obviously in no position to aid this. It is, in fact, aiding the Zionist aggression and the Zionist eventual goal of Greater Israel. So, this is not all happening in isolation. This is all happening in conjunction. This is all part of the Greater Israel plan. The US is fully backing it, and so are the allies. And I think one of the last things I wanted to point out on this one is this tweet by Daniela that also says what I just mentioned about Israeli media. So she says a former intelligence officer and current Israeli journalist for Axios, Walla News, and CNN, Barak Ravid, said the ceasefire did not collapse. It was collapsed by the Israeli government. The Israeli government never intended to fully implement the ceasefire agreement signed 2 months ago. It violated one of its key provisions, reneged on it, and tried to force an alternate agreement on Hamas. So that's their own people telling you that, this idea that, oh, Hamas did this, Hamas did that, that we've been hearing from the start is entirely false. And again, there's no stopping them except the resistance. And who is actually doing anything? It's Yemen, it's Ansarallah, and they're the ones that are receiving now the mark of being terrorists. And again, this is just the war on terror and more on the ceasefire itself, right? Now we know that there is the border, the Rafah border, and we have Egypt and you have Jordan as well. But both Egypt and Jordan are controlled by Israel. If you, for example, want to go to the West Bank in Palestine, you have to go through Tel Aviv or you have to go through Jordan and cross the bridge and get there that way. But you can't go through Jordan without being allowed in by the Israeli government, essentially. So if Jordan is in control, is controlled by Israel, if Jordan's border crossings and Egypt's border crossings are controlled by Israel, do they really have sovereignty? Are they really in charge of their affairs? It really seems like the answer is no to me, right? And so the Jerusalem Post reposted this by Al Akbar, which is Lebanese, I believe, Lebanese media. And I said that the ceasefire that was the continuity of Israel's plan for the complete takeover of Gaza and eradication of Palestinians is now on its next phase, expulsion. Because in order for Donald Trump to get his luxury real estate and for Jared Kushner to come in and for pretty much Israel to take over, right? There needs to be an expulsion of these people, of the Palestinian people, the ethnically indigenous people of this area, to go somewhere else so this can happen. And this is the way. They've been trying to send them to Egypt, like, like just mere hurting them like they're animals. This is the point of view that they have of these people. And the Egyptian president has reportedly, El-Sisi, right? He has reportedly said that Egypt was ready to receive the 500,000 Gazans from the Gaza Strip. Now, this has been contended in the next tweet, and that I think you already have up, yes. And I have some screenshots there. So this has been contended by the Egyptian government, who has said, no, we didn't say that. And so the Cradle posted that the Egyptian General Authority for Information denies the claims circulated by some media outlets that Egypt is ready to temporarily relocate 500,000 residents from Gaza to the North Sinai area as part of the reconstruction part. So they deny this, but like I said, do they actually have jurisdiction over what's going to happen? Because when they were told to close their border, they did. And they're not in control. And so this was actually something that was told to journalists from Al Akbar, and it was revealed by the Arab diplomatic sources. And this was, I think, at a meeting, and there was two meetings that were had in Riyadh and Doha, and they write that, and this is directly a translation from the Al Akbar site. You have to go to the Arabic site to get this. So that's why a lot of people didn't do that. So it says the research seemed to concern not only the high probability of the war returning to Gaza, but also its expansion to other areas, especially Yemen and Iran. A diplomat participating in the two meetings on the developments in the region for news summarized the results as followed. So I'm going to go on to the next one and read. First, the Riyadh meeting was the first of its kind in terms of full participation of the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in putting forward ideas and searching for solutions. And he urged the participants to discuss realistic and practical decisions that form the basis for any steps taken by the Arab countries, talking about the repercussions of what is happening today on the Arab countries for many decades to come. It was noted that the enthusiasm also included the president of the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed bin Zayed, with clear Kuwaiti support, and the Egyptian interest in knowing the nature of the role that the Gulf countries will play in the upcoming stage. Now, this will come into play when I talk about Syria and what's happening, but in essence, the Gulf countries have largely betrayed the resistance. They are essentially under the control of the West and the Zionist Israeli entity. They're essentially working together. And this is part of the Israeli US plan to use the Gulf states as a method to isolate Iran and break up the resistance and combat it this way. And that's exactly what we're seeing happen right now. And so I don't for a second doubt that Egypt will fold and that Jordan will follow, right? They also talk about there not being an alternative to the two-state solution, and that there has to be, obviously, they're advocating for the existence of Israel and the existence of a Palestinian state. This is what the Arab states are advocating for. Israel has never advocated for Palestine to exist. So let's get that clear. However, as long as Israel exists, we know that they will not allow Palestine to exist. So a two-state solution is unrealistic. And they continue to note that that Qatar declares its permanent standing with Hamas, which apparently took the initiative to soften its position on the issue of the movement's role in the administration of Gaza, but while refusing to remove the movement from the scene, it agreed to a framework that practically removes Hamas from any leadership role in the Strip in the next stage. They also discussed the need for understanding to prevent the outbreak of a Palestinian civil war if the Americans decide to support parties in the face of Hamas. So essentially what they're talking about here is the complete removal of the resistance, because Hamas is a faction of the resistance. It's not everything, but it is the most right now militant and forward faction that is there protecting, fighting for the Palestinians. So the removal of Hamas would essentially leave what? It's going to leave the Palestinian Authority, which is under Israeli control, and it's going to have as I mentioned in my earlier article, it's going to have US troops there to facilitate this wonderful transitioning of the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians and the complete, just total eradication of everything. Um, and so they said that they want American guarantees, and they talked about that. And then the last thing I want to highlight on this, which is the major thing, it says the participants faced the problem of the reconstruction in Gaza. The conversation was frank in terms of the existence of significant conditions set by the United States. So why does the United States get to set conditions in Gaza, in Palestine, a foreign country, not just Israel? At this point, the attendees were surprised by an alarming Egyptian signal as President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi informed the attendees of his country's readiness to facilitate the process by approving a temporary evacuation of 500,000 Palestinians from Gaza to a city designated for them in North Sinai. The step requires Cairo to open the borders to those wishing to leave the Gaza Strip voluntarily, which has raised the concern of the Jordanian side, which said that it is ready to help shelter refugees who are exclusively from the families of the wounded and for a specific period of time. So, who's lying here? I don't think personally that the people who reported on this are lying. Why would they where would they even get to make this up? They specifically went down and discussed everything that was said, and now Egypt comes back and says, "No, we didn't say that." Well, probably because of the backlash they've experienced and the bad PR they've experienced. That doesn't mean that they didn't say it. And now this was said in an Arabic site, so people have to do the work of going to the Arabic site. And I posted the link on my X, so you can all go and translate the page yourselves and read it. But again, I for one do not bet on Egypt or Jordan. I believe they are going to fold. Um, so now we've covered the attack on Yemen by the US and the UK, the resumption of ethnic cleansing and genocide in Gaza, and also Egypt and Jordan playing their role along with the Gulf as facilitating this transition of ethnic cleansing and receiving being willing to receive these millions of Palestinians there. So the other thing that's happened is Israel has also been attacking Syria simultaneously as HTS has been attacking Syria and Lebanon. The Israelis have attacked and placed airstrikes on southern Lebanon and Bekaa. And this has been happening, like I said, for a while. There was supposed to be a ceasefire, but again, Israel continuously broke that ceasefire. And so I just wanted to point that out as well, because this has been an ongoing thing for the people of Lebanon. You know, this is normal for them. When you're in Lebanon, you just hear, oh, like there's a ceasefire. You see the Israeli military planes go around. You hear about this destruction, and you see the results of the Israeli bunkbuster bomb that killed Hassan Nasrallah, and the results on the residential areas that were bombed by Israel. And it takes you, you know, to a place where you have to imagine that this has become the normality for the people of the region. And for what? What exactly has been their crime is saying, well, we don't want to be controlled by the West or by Israel. So, just to put it in very simplistic terms here. And the last thing that I want to move to, well, not the last, but in terms of the this area of the world, is Syria. And this is going to be kind of a very, very, very condensed version because my article explains it much more thoroughly. But I'll start with Vanessa's tweet because she has been visiting the refugees that are coming in from Syria into Lebanon. And she's been taking some trips and interviewing people and talking with them. And they're giving her a lot of information and a lot of numbers. So she said, as of yesterday, an estimated 8,000 Syrians have made it to safety in Lebanon. 2,000 families and more are pouring in on a daily basis. We were told recently by recently arrived Syrians that the number of slaughtered in Syria is probably closer to 10 to 12,000, with entire villages wiped out in secret. The media has been reporting 1,000 or so, nowhere near these numbers. The internet is cut, there's no food or water, the supplies are being poisoned, according to reports, Zionist tactics. This is not the first time that HTS has done this. They've done it before. These people arrived with nothing. EU, UN, and NGOs in Lebanon are providing less than 2% of their needs, having already closed their borders to persecuted minorities fleeing EU-backed Al-Qaeda security terrorist forces. Local Akkar municipalities are doing their best to house and provide for the traumatized Syrian families. And so she went to Akkar and spoke to these families that escaped the atrocities in the coastal area of Homs and Hama. And most of these people didn't want to be shown. They didn't want to be their faces, because they know that if they are found, they will be assassinated and killed like everybody else. And she talks about that. And so again, I'm going to have Vanessa on to talk more about this, because she is a depth of knowledge on this sort of thing. But I want to go over a little bit of this article that I wrote, because I touch on a couple of important things that kind of just unite everything together, all the things that I've been talking about. So let's just start by bringing up the article, Jayme, and I'll just talk through it. So my whole point in this article is to basically show that the Syrian genocide, because you're talking about specifically, right, Alawites being persecuted, but the Christians, the Mennonites, but then it was anybody that said anything against the current government, HTS terrorist factions, or even was mistaken. Anybody that they could find, they started killing everybody: Shia, Sunni, Alawite, Christian, whatever, children, babies. This is called genocide. There's no other way to describe it: ethnic cleansing, slaughter, right? And so the whole thing in the media, in some well-intentioned people as well, is that this has been described as a sectarian issue. This is sectarian violence. And this is used in a way to dismiss it as, oh, this region is always uh, at war with each other. These crazy Muslims, Islamic Sharia law. This is what people say. They just talk about it like, oh, this is normal for them. No, actually, Syria was the only secular and multi-religious country in the region that was functioning very well in that cultural aspect, where people of all faiths lived and considered themselves to be Syrians. They didn't have this sectarian divide at that level that the media is saying. The reality is, this sectarianism has been a deliberate Western strategy to essentially dominate the region. They have been wanting to overthrow Bashar al-Assad for a long time. They have been wanting to replace it with destabilizing factions like HTS, the White Helmets, if you recall, in order to control the region. Because now, as Syria fell, it's getting sliced up like a carcass, and the vultures are coming, and the vultures are Turkey. The vultures are also Israel and the United States, as well as, of course, the terrorist factions that are there. And Syria, as we knew it, as a secular, a diverse country, is completely gone. Okay, so this is not something that happened overnight. This has been a long planned objective. Now, this is extended to the entire region, right? And so I talk about the 10,000 plus dead. And if you read the article, I put links so you all can see exactly what I'm talking about. And of course, most recently, what happened was that there was these HTS terrorists that came in, illegally crossed over from Syria, went into Lebanon, and then were confronted and killed by the local forces. And by local forces, I mean the local tribesmen, the people of the region, who literally took them down. And so then HTS responded by launching around 50 rockets to North Lebanon's village that was full of families, because remember, these countries border each other, right? And simultaneously, as that was happening, Israel was also launching attacks in the south of Lebanon. So you had both the terrorist factions attacking southern Lebanon, and they were also attacking, of course, Syria and Israel doing the same at the same time. So I think that shows you why HTS is not going to attack Israel, why they never go after Israel. It is because this is part of Israel's plan. They're in line with what Israel is doing. And this is why these people have nothing to do with Syria. They're completely foreign assets. You have people from Tajikistan, from Uzbekistan, from the Uyghurs. You have these people that have been sought out and brought into these radical Wahhabist terrorist factions that are now going around and killing people. And of course, we know these are Western funded. And so I kind of reiterate that this was, a US backed Israeli Turkish Gulf plan to oust Assad. And I want to go down to um, pointing out somebody that was killed that wasn't an Alawite and wasn't a Christian, and that was the Sheikh Abdul Rahman Al Dala. He was the head of the Center for Research and Studies on Islamic Unity in Syria. He was a Sunni, and he was assassinated by HTS because he condemned the ethnic cleansing of the Alawites. So again, this isn't about just the Alawites or the Assad remnants, which is the other thing I want to talk about, the Assad remnants, right? So again, I mentioned that the BBC has grossly diminished the numbers of people that have been killed, and that the Syrian government has said that they will hold accountable, that they will hold the if you just go down a little bit, there's a tweet that the Syrian government has said that they will hold these people accountable for killing these Alawites, but it's just not the case because the Syrian court, the Ministry of Defense, that court is actually made up of former former, right? Al Qaeda members. So they're not going to punish themselves. You're talking about the serial killers doing an investigation inside themselves. That's just not going to happen. So now getting to the point of this orchestration, right? This coordinated blueprint that has been spanning decades. And I want to touch on the Assad remnants aspect of this because it's just false. And I've seen several people repeat it, several of these influencers on X and several other journalists who should know better. This this idea, it's a fabrication meant to basically excuse the fact that this is ethnic cleansing and blame it on Assad and the supporters of Assad. But like I mentioned, and like many others have mentioned, they aren't the only ones being killed. And the Assad remnants theory is literally just people trying to run away because they're going to be massacred anyway. So um I said that this perspective disregards countless individuals who do not fit the criteria, yet continue to be murdered. Thousands are currently fleeing Syria with little and attempting to start over because if they and their families stay, they will undoubtedly be massacred. No one is denying at this point Syria's internal problems or even Assad's role in misdirecting them. But using these talking points doesn't really help the situation. Um, Pushing the Assad's remnant narrative empowers the long prepared ethnic cleansing of Syrians as sectarian or valid punishment when it is in fact the result of serious coordination, planning, and decades long execution by the West and its Zionist partners seeking to isolate Iran, control the region, and expand Greater Israel. So, I put in the links of the examples that people have been, talking about the Assad remnants. And Vanessa, again, she did outline the numerous CIA and MI6 interventions in Syria in her article that I linked there from October 2021, The 75 Years and Counting, A History of Western Regime Change in Syria, Part 1. And one thing I want to point out from the information in her article is that back in 1969, Miles Copeland, who was a former CIA officer, he outlined in this BBC interview that the CIA organized, directed, and completely coordinated a coup that failed in 1949. This was when Syria ended the colonial and French occupation that existed there. And then Washington ousted their legitimately elected president. because the president supported Palestine and rejected Israel. And that was the time that Israel was established under then US President Harry S. Truman. And then the former president had also rejected a specific pipeline. And when we talk about Palestine, when we talk about the region, there's always obviously resource extraction that's at the helm, and obviously oil. And so the former president that was ousted, his name is Al-Kawatli, he was against this Trans-Arabian pipeline called TAP Line, and this was a joint venture involving Standard Oil of New Jersey, which is now ExxonMobil, and Standard Oil of California, and Texaco, which is now Chevron. So again, this has been ongoing for a long time, and the WikiLeaks exposed this during the email thread to Hillary Clinton. And if you can show that one, Jayme, that there's a if you just keep going down that, there's a WikiLeaks email thread right under it should be right under there, but there it is. Thank you. And so what happened during this was on June 23rd, 2012, there was an intelligence note from Israel, and they had mentioned that the fall of Assad in Syria would spark a Sunni Shia war that would benefit Israel. And they also mentioned that with the fall of Damascus under Assad, that Iran would lose its only ally in the region and then would be isolated, which is, again, this is all about getting to Iran, right? So they hope that Iran would just be drawn to this, and then it would just be an all-out regional war, diverting attention away from its nuclear armament. And they suggested that this could eventually lead to the downfall of the Iranian government itself. And so they outline this, right? And it's kind of crazy to look at this and see what's happening now, years later, over a decade later. And now you can understand this is not something that just happens because of one person, because of Bashar al-Assad. These are several moves that are combined to create this to happen. And so, in essence, to put it very simply, the US funded Israel, backed by the West. And primarily, we're talking about Washington, the United States, and Britain. They would use their intelligence apparatus, their intelligence forces that had birthed these terrorist groups, including ISIS, Al Qaeda, the White Helmets, and all these spin offs that you see in Syria, to destabilize Syria, remove Assad from power, and then continue supporting these groups until Syrians just killed one another, or that's what it seemed like. But it's not Syrians, it's these groups. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. And as I said, the reason you're not going to see Israel get attacked is because precisely they're part of the plan for all of this. Another thing that the email mentioned was that the EU officials were concerned that this was going to bring in radical Islamic regimes in power, because they had to admit that Bashar al-Assad's government, which they considered dangerous, was still better in many ways and less dangerous than what could happen. And that didn't stop Israel from using these very factions, or from the US from using them. But they didn't attack Iran at that time because they thought it would unite the axis of resistance. And they waited, of course, until now. And we're seeing them target Syria, Hezbollah, Palestine, Yemen, and increasingly rely on Qatar, on Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Egypt, as I mentioned earlier, right? So again, this is all Western sabotage. This is all part of that agenda. This is not something that Syrians themselves just brought about. I'm not saying there's no fault for the internal problems that led to the fall of Syria, but I am saying that the West largely exacerbates these problems, just like we've seen in Venezuela and Cuba and Nicaragua and all these other countries that they've attempted to overthrow, but they've failed at, because it's very, very hard. I mean, Syria was fighting for over a decade against this, against what is happening right now. And after all of that, this is what happened. So the other thing I want to talk about in the Syria stuff is how, again, the Gulf is being used to isolate the resistance, to isolate Iran and broker this fractionalize these groups and turn them essentially against each other. And there was an interview that Bashar al-Assad did back in 2016 for this newspaper called El País, and he said that we definitely need the help of Russia and Iran for a simple reason, because more than 80 countries supported those terrorists in different ways, some of them directly with money, with logistical support, with armaments, with recruitments. Some other countries supported them politically in different international forums. And Syria is a small country who could fight. We could fight, but in the end, there's limited support and recruitment for those terrorists. You definitely need international support. So he was talking about the war that occurred and how Syria really needed Iran and Russia at that moment, and how for the people that say these were all Assad's terrorists, that there were actual non-Syrians from 80 countries coming into Syria creating this. So that's another important point to point out. This What's happening in Syria is not coming from Syrians, it's coming from people who are not even Syrian. And I think people need to understand that. Very, very huge point. The last thing in terms of Syria is Russia's interest in Syria and how that's changed, right? Because I've sort of talked about this before. I've definitely talked about it with Vanessa, but initially Russia was fighting along Syria in this war. The Russian military was heavily invested. Russia has the military base there, but there have been now multiple reliable accounts on why Assad pivoted away from Iran into the Gulf. And that was largely pressured by Russia, who has been seeking diplomatic relationships with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar, with the UAE, with essentially pretty much the entire Gulf, as well as Syria, Iran, etc. And Russia has a relationship with Israel. They've always had it. There's 1.3 million Russians living in Tel Aviv, in Israel, essentially. And there is that connection as well. And Russia has always tried to act as this neutral um, entity in the region by condemning what Israel's doing, simultaneously saying that they advocate for a two-state solution. And recently there's been some developments on that. So at that time, Putin wanted the conflict to end already. It was like 2017, and he wanted things to be resolved, because the Russian perspective is, we need to make things not unstable. We need to just completely pragmatically resolve the crisis. And Bashar al-Assad refused to have conversations with Erdogan at that time. And throughout this whole thing, he has refused to have conversations with Erdogan, and that was something that really angered Russia, to be frank, because they wanted that situation with Turkey to be resolved. Now you also have the Black Sea grain corridor issue coming into play, where Russia was reliant on Turkey in that way, and because of the Ukraine war. So you have all of these things at play. So if you guys recall, back at the meeting in Doha on December 7th, that was the day before Syria fell. There was the Turkish foreign minister, the Iranian foreign minister, and the Russian foreign ministers all meeting to discuss Syria in in the Astana format. And they also ended up meeting with the Saudi foreign minister. And Lavrov again said terrorists shouldn't control Syria, but there needs to be a conversation with the opposition as well. This is something that, for example, the resistance axis would never say, because they see the opposition as not being anything legitimate, right? The next day, though, December 8th, the Syrian army command notified the officers that Assad's rule had ended and Damascus fell. And this is, I don't know if you all heard about this, but I want to bring this up. So, about a week after that, the Turkish foreign minister, whose name is Hakan Fidan, told a local TV news station that Turkey played a pivotal role in ensuring the removal of Assad, right? And he said that they also ensured that Assad's allies in Iran and Russia did not intervene in the offensive that toppled Assad's government. They admitted that Ankara had a role in training the Syrian terrorists that he called these rebels, which is always what they refer to. And he said that he worked to ensure that the Russians did not enter the equation and that they discussed this in Doha and that both Iran and Russia saw no point in continuing this further. And I also know why it's hard to rely on Turkey's words because Erdogan as a president and as a leader and Turkish politics as a whole in the current administration have always gone where the wind blows. This is why you're seeing now a lot of opposition to them. They go where they can most get out of the situation. And but it would be hard to make all of that up. So it's something that I think people should know and understand because when we're talking about the Russian government, I think a lot of people have essentially made it out to be like the Soviet Union in its ideology, and it is not. There are Russians that have that, especially you'll see a lot of the patriots in Donbass who are fighting against the neo-Nazis and have this ideological spirit that they're fighting for something much bigger than themselves. And Russia's war in Ukraine was existential. If they didn't fight, then NATO would essentially take over. That doesn't mean that it was an ideological thing for the government. The government is looking at this in a very pragmatic, direct way where they're seeking to uh, basically ensure their national security interests. They're seeking to ensure that their borders are safe and they are trying to survive economically in an era where they're being sanctioned massively and they are being threatened. So that's they're not looking at this. Russia itself is not an ideological government. It is a government that's interested in economic growth. It's interested in security. And this is why so many people, and I'll get into this later, were so surprised that Putin would accept this deal, but I wasn't because I understand how the government looks at things and operates. It's not necessarily how everybody in Russia operates, just like it isn't in the US, but in terms of their needs and strategic interests, Russia doesn't have that axis of resistance, ideologically driven mm, action plan that Iran, for example, may have to a degree that Hezbollah has. That because these aren't countries, Hezbollah, Ansarallah, these are resistance factions, but some of these countries are more ideologically driven. Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, like I said, Iran. These are countries that are heavily invested in ideologically driven politics. Russia is a capitalist country. It is not the Soviet Union. And people have put their own desires, I think, their own sort of desires onto what they want Russia to be instead of what it actually is. And again, you always see Russia align with the UN diplomatic charter. You always see them advocate for a two-state solution. This is just the reality of the situation, right? So I don't know if people know, but in January, Netanyahu had sent a military secretary to Moscow and they had diplomatic meetings with Moscow. And this was aimed, of course, at strengthening their ties with Russia, their cooperation with Russia. My whole thing is, why are people not able to discuss that aspect of it? It's like they ignore it. This is a real thing. Now, Israel's position on Syria um, has been very clear. They have been advocating, they lobbied the United States and Washington to allow Russia to keep its base because they wanted to stop Turkey's influence in the region. So they want to limit this Turkish involvement, right? And again, there was also a pressure to have Russia advocate with Hamas in favor of Israel to release some of the prisoners, the Israeli hostages, including Maxim Herkin, who was a dual Israeli Russian citizen. So again, this is all part of that. Now, Israel, like I said, preferred Russia instead of Turkey. So they would rather have them there than Turkey in the region because they know Erdogan has this neo-Ottoman dream and they don't want any competition, and neither does the United States. So Russia, for its own interests, has been in conversations with both Israel and with the new Syrian regime, which I will call a regime because it is literally engaging in ethnic cleansing, and under Jolani. They've had multiple conversations. They were among the first to recognize the new flag of Syria in their embassies. This was all put out by Russian media. And you know, this is again things that actually happened. And so when I talk about, analyzing things, I don't do it out of just because of what I think. I do it based on what's actually happening in the background of this hoorah rah multipolar world that everybody's just talking about. Yes, a multipolar world is emerging, but what does that mean? It can mean very different things. And so they talked about Iran's nuclear program as well when we talk about the first meeting between Trump and Putin. That was something that they talked about. So um, let's go back to the folder because that was kind of a long diversion. And I want to go back to Russia in a minute. But like I said, under the Russia tab, still in the first section, Jayme, I do point out this from Reuters, the Jolani meeting with Putin. Well, there was a phone call prior, but here we're talking about Putin offering Syria's Shara, Jolani, support and cooperation. This is published by Reuters, but it's also been published in Russian media. March 20th, President Vladimir Putin sent a message to Syrian leader Ahmed al-Shara Jolani, backing efforts to ensure Syria's territorial integrity and offering Russia's practical cooperation on a whole range of issues, the Kremlin said on Thursday. The fall in December of President Bashar al-Assad to rebels led by Shara after 13 years of civil war has forced Russia to scramble to secure its bases in the country. Moscow is also concerned by a wave of sectarian killings in Syria. So, okay. Basically what I said, guys. This is true. I'm not making this up. So Russia is looking to secure its base. They also are looking to have this base in Libya, which is with these negotiations, they will be able to, but they didn't see any reason to continue this war. For them, it was going nowhere and it was just more of a nuisance. So, that's the reality on that. So now we come to Turkey. And if you guys, this is the first time you've been watching, please share the stream. We're being completely throttled and shadow banned, and we had all sorts of just problems today. Again, Mercury's and Gatorade is what I call it. But let me continue because I haven't streamed in like a week or more. So there's a lot of things that I didn't get to cover that I've just been so eager to cover. So let me actually just take a moment, because I've been talking endlessly, and Pasta usually does a lot of talking too. So now I'm the one that's doing all the talking. But so okay, the next thing is Turkey, right? So look, is Erdogan extremely unpopular? Yes. Erdogan is hugely unpopular. He has done this before. He has completely controlled. When you talk about dictatorships, if there's anybody that goes after their opponents unfairly and makes it impossible for the country to elect anybody democratically except him, it's Erdogan. And he never really gets this rap out there outside of Turkey. But for the majority of people, he is pretty much what you would consider a dictator, but he never gets called that. So what ended up happening was that Erdogan had jailed his more popular political rival, and who was a mayor of Istanbul, okay? And so then what happened is mass protests erupted, and thousands of people, now millions, because this has expanded, have been protesting what he did because they see it as a complete and total just violation of democracy. This isn't the first time he's done this, or that he has been at the brink of being removed. And for me, when I talk about these things, right? I look at the whole thing and the general timing of everything. That's what I said, this is incessant and hasn't stopped. Um so Israel, as I just mentioned earlier, right, has been against Turkey's influence in the region. So much so that they've been advocating for Russia to keep its base to the US, which kind of lands perfectly with Russia having this ceasefire negotiation with the United States. And with, of course, that we know the Middle East and the region was discussed by Trump and Putin. They discussed this as well. So all of these things, as I said, are connected. Now, HTS, right, is a Turkish thing. It's a Turkish, it's a Turkish, I would say, consequence. They specifically used HTS to target Syria, but so did Israel. And Israel has been working with Turkey and with these HTS factions. However, now that Syria fell, Israel doesn't want competition in the region because their entire end game is to establish greater Israel. And the United States is down bad with that plan. They're ready for it. And so Russia right now isn't happy with Turkey. They've had this forced relationship, an increasingly friendly relationship, at least in display, because of the sanctions on Russia, because Turkey has been an area where there is a sort of neutral ground between Europe and the rest of Europe and Russia, and because of the Black Sea Grain Corridor and the negotiations regarding that. However, if this ceasefire goes through and that ends, they don't necessarily need to rely on Ankara as much, do they? And they also then don't necessarily need to put up with Turkey's and Erdogan's antics. Like, for example, Erdogan saying that they will never recognize Crimea as being a part of Russia recently, even though it's been 11 years now since this happened. And so what we're looking at here is kind of interesting that suddenly millions of people want to oust Erdogan. And while a lot of people will be happy to see him go, right, because he's not a well liked individual and he is really one of the hands behind the fall of Damascus, it's interesting who benefits from all of this. And who benefits, again, is Israel, our Israel and Washington, really. Um, and once you have Turkey removed and you have these factions in one way or another under the control of the US and Israel, you're just going to see the same thing. Either way, the people of the region of Gaza, of Syria, they lose. But it's just again moving actors that are no longer serving a purpose. We're going to see that with Zelensky. Zelensky's going to be removed also, I believe, because there's no way you can keep somebody that wasn't even elected, that was appointed, and canceled the election as well. So that's something that I needed to point out. And there's another video that just shows more of just the latest, by Sonia van den Ende, who really has been to Syria and talks about the region often. And she basically outlines the massive unrest in Turkey continues, not only Istanbul, but Adana, Izmir, Ankara, Antalya, etc. In Istanbul alone, it is estimated that more than 1 million people were demonstrating. Erdogan is arresting all opponents, like Aslan Uzun, head of the Yeşilkent Alevi Association. So again, this is happening on the back end of so many things. And now we're finally at the Russia-Ukraine US relations. First of all, the fact that, you know, the Ukrainians are kept out is points to the fact that they have zero control. Zelensky has zero control. It's almost sad to see. Honestly, I almost it does make me be like, geez, this is very cringy. The fact that you are the president of Ukraine, but you're not even involved in these discussions at all. It's like, again, the kids sit over here, the adults are talking. And if anybody needed more proof that Ukraine has been a US NATO proxy, it is what is happening right now, and it's just very clear. So let's go through, because I want to go through the actual um statement that the US put out, and the Kremlin statement is different. I think it's somewhere in here. But let's go over the US statement, and then we'll go over the Kremlin statement, which is similar but different because the Kremlin just focuses on Russia, Ukraine, while the US focused on everything else. So this was the readout from the White House March 18th, and that was 2025. And if you can, it's in that thread, Jayme. It's in that thread if you can pull it up, and I'll try to find the Kremlin. Um, It's the thread of no. It's the thread of Russia-Ukraine negotiations in the documents. The first tweet under this document. It says, breaking Putin and Trump agree Iran should never be in a position capable of destroying Israel. So yeah, if you just go, I want to read the whole statement from the US. Okay. Well, you can keep that there, and I'll just go ahead and read the statement from the US. So let me send it to you. Maybe you can put it up on the screen. Okay, that one. Okay, so I'll just start reading it. So this is what Press Secretary Carolyn Levitt, right, had. And she said, today, President Trump and President Putin spoke about the need for peace and a ceasefire in the Ukraine war. Both leaders agreed this conflict needs to end with a lasting peace. They also stressed the need for improved bilateral relations between the United States and Russia. The blood and treasure that both Russia and Ukraine have been spending in this war would be better spent on the needs of their people. This conflict should never have started and should have been ended long ago with sincere and good faith peace efforts. The leaders agreed that the movement to peace will begin with an energy and infrastructure ceasefire, as well as technical negotiations on the implementation of a maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea, full ceasefire and permanent peace. These negotiations will begin immediately in the Middle East. The leaders spoke broadly about the Middle East as a region of potential cooperation to prevent future conflicts. They further discussed the need to stop proliferation of strategic weapons and will engage with others to ensure the broadest possible application. The two leaders shared the view that Iran should never be in a position to destroy Israel. The two leaders agreed that a future with an improved bilateral relationship between the United States and Russia has huge upside. This includes enormous economic deals and geopolitical stability when peace has been achieved. So, one of the main things out of all of that, right, was this ceasefire deal negotiation. It's a momentary one, but will expand to a permanent one, which is Russia's desire, because Russia doesn't want anything momentary. For the long run, they obviously want to secure the national interest. They obviously want to continue to ensure that that happens. The problem is that, in my opinion, this is a shit deal because Russia's winning. They don't need to stop. However, they agreed on the energy sector. They agreed on not attacking energy sectors. So it's not everything. It's just in general, the energy infrastructure right now, and then expanding into more infrastructure. So both Ukraine and Russia will stay away from attacking energy infrastructure, but Ukraine doesn't seem to be seriously respecting this. However, Putin has now said that they will respect this. So a lot of people are kind of upset because it does seem like this is Minsk 3. And again, Russia has the upper hand militarily. they have the upper hand in terms of how the rest of the world is now viewing this, besides the West, because they're paid and and forced to view it this way. Everybody else is clearly seeing that this war is a loss for the US and its proxy Ukraine and NATO, and it's just been a complete failure. But in agreeing to this energy, to not attacking the energy infrastructure, Russia doesn't really lose out because he's already essentially destroyed areas of infrastructure. So it's not really a losing end for them at this point. However, when it comes to relying on the United States, how can you after the first, second time that they've done this to you over and over again? And I don't think that Putin is unintelligent. I think he's extremely intelligent. However, I do think that there is, and people may not believe this, but there is a huge desire to normalize relations with the United States. There is a huge desire to just end this war. It's been going now for 3 years. There it does have an effect on the economy. No matter what you hear, it's going to affect the economy, even though Russia saw this before and made the necessary preparations to deal with it. It still affects the economy. It still affects the people. um, Having drones over Moscow and having an inability to for Russians to travel, an inability for certain business aspects. They've been very resilient in building and their own enterprises. And this is a good thing, actually, because you want to stop reliance on the West. And so that's been the good aspect of all of this, but it still creates a deficit in the economy no matter what, because war is costly. And then there's also the factor that, in spite of the fact that Ukraine has lost many more people, Russians have also lost people, and we can't forget that. So when people analyze and say, well, Russia's never going to take this, they're never going to respond to this, they're putting, once again, their own idea of this ideological fight, when it's really, you have to get down to the cost of war, both in terms of people and in terms of money, and that aspect. So the other thing, obviously, that I wanted to discuss on this was the um, mentioned that Russia and the United States agree that Iran should never be in a position where it can destroy Israel. Now, the Kremlin didn't put that in their statement. And so a lot of people say, well, maybe it's fake because the Kremlin didn't put that in their statement. However, Russian state media, RIA Novosti, TASS, what's RT, all shared that. They shared the what the US said. If the US didn't say, if they were lying, they would have not shared it, or they would have it taken down. Yes, they make mistakes all the time. Most news agencies do, but they would have taken it down, or they would have said, "Oh, actually, Russia didn't say that. Doesn't agree that that was said." And based on everything else that I just talked about, it would not be a far-fetched thing for Russia to say, because they believe in a two-state solution. They believe in the existence of Israel. There are millions of Russians in Israel. So they're not going to want to destroy Israel. And there's a lot of there's Israeli oligarchs. There's like Israel has influence in a lot of sectors, including the media. And I'm not making this up. This is just a fact, right? And so it wouldn't be surprising for them to have said it. And the Kremlin, usually when they post their statements, they post statements just, they're focused on Russia, Ukraine. So they mainly focused on that. They didn't really go into depth. Now there's a possibility of the translation, losing something in translation, but there's also the objective, the Kremlin's going to put out something to focus on Russia, Ukraine, and not distract from that. But what ended up happening was that people saw the US statement and were like surprised that Russia would say that. And I'm not, because, like, as I said, the Russians have a relationship with Israel. And this is nothing new. And people kind of, I think there's a sense of cognitive dissonance in that because we're seeing what Israel is doing and how, we go after the United States for funding. Now, Russia isn't funding Israel. Russia isn't working militarily with Israel. It's not the same thing. But when you talk about a relationship, there's a relationship there. Just like there is a relationship with China and Saudi Arabia in spite of what they're doing to Yemen. And there's a relationship where China thinks Israel should exist. And people don't talk about that either because it kind of jars with their whole ideological worship of the certain governments and states. And again, I'm somebody that doesn't worship any government or state. So there you go. This is kind of why. Um, but in essence, I think that's a very huge point that kind of encapsulates everything that I've been talking about. When we talk about that relationship, well, now you see how the the Russian mindset in terms of the government only, I'm only going to speak in terms of the government, is going to affect its decision making going forward into a ceasefire with the United States, into a resolution with the United States. And I do see that happening. I do see a end to the war in Ukraine because one, Donald Trump needs a win. And you can go into the second tweet, Jayme, and this is the last thing that I'm going to talk about. This is more in along the lines of the US negotiations, right? So this happened, this I wrote earlier, but one of the things I want to get across here is what Waltz had in essence summarized that said that there would be territorial concessions required from Ukraine. And we're talking about Donbass, Crimea, they have to recognize that because even though it's been 11 years for Crimea, there's still a lack of recognition. There's the drones, there's the constant attacks in Crimea, the bombing of the Crimean Bridge, which was, of course, UK, NATO intelligence as well. And so there has to be a guarantee that that will stop in exchange for a certain amount of the groups of troops that are supposed to be in Ukraine. And there obviously is going to be an end to the hostilities, and it's going to be a process. But my worry for Russia is that these troops, that they're calling them peace troops, and Russia very well knows this, are not necessarily not NATO, right? They're calling them peacekeepers, but let's be real. It's how can you trust that that's not NATO? How can you trust that they're not going to be pro NATO? So for me, unless there is some sort of dropping of that completely, if Russia accepts this, this is just going to continue down the line, not necessarily with this administration, but with the next. Because what we're seeing is Trump's role is to go into the Middle East, to go against Iran. We've seen the rhetoric coming from the most Zionist administration in history, in US history, into focusing on Iran, of course, China. But the whole point is to target Iran, to isolate Iran. And now Russia has the opportunity to get out of this war. However, if they want to normalize relations with the US, they're going to have to. Um, Donald Trump is making it so they have to. And as I've talked about this with Vanessa before, Donald Trump is somebody that operates on either a win lose scenario or would rather just lose lose. He doesn't fold, he doesn't bend when it comes to things. This is the type of foreign policy he's been pushing out into the world. And I haven't had the time to even address what's happening with Latin America, but that's coming. And what he's doing with this, targeting, for example, this Palestinian activist, and what that means in essence for us all in the US, for spying on people, using AI and all of these disastrous attacks against the First Amendment and expansion of the surveillance state. What Donald Trump is doing here is he's trying to force Russia, even though Russia is holding all the cards in terms of military aspect, but there is a desire to have this relationship with the United States to be able to start again. And unfortunately, what ends up happening with somebody like Donald Trump is, I'm just telling you what has been said here, is the belief that he is different than Joe Biden enough to perhaps try something new. And it's not just Russia, it happens, for example, in the Middle East as well. And the belief that maybe with him, because he is anti, woke, and because he holds these conservative values, and because he's, focused on getting rid of the globalists, because of that, there is a reason to trust in what the US is being put out. There is overall in Latin America, in the Middle East, in Russia, a really hard to understand sense of trust and, to a degree, naivety when it comes to the US. And I've said this before, I have not met somebody who is Russian that is more distrustful and just critical of the US as I am, and as any American mostly that is here. Um, it just doesn't happen. And I have these conversations over and over again when I go to events, when I go to other countries, and people are like, yeah, but, you know, y- but maybe this time. No, 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 no. Like the US government as it stands, the intelligence military apparatus is never going to allow another country to be its equal without getting something else out of it. Whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's Iran, this is a warning to all those countries and the people making these decisions that they're not going to do it. They're just not, as it exists now. If it was a totally different government governed by different people, not psychopaths, not terrorists in suits, then yeah, I think you could have a relationship based on equity, based on cooperation and mutual respect, the ideals that Russia and China and all these other countries say, right? That these diplomats like Lavrov go out and say that they seek with other like countries, that they seek cooperation, mutual respect, national sovereignty, these sort of ideals. But with the United States, they're not the government right now. Trump, Biden, it's the same thing. Trump's government is one of continuity. We're continuing the war on terror, and just because we're closing down right now, possibly with Russia, doesn't mean that it's the end, especially when you look at what they're doing with these surrounding countries in Moldova, and you've seen what's happened to Georgia. You're seeing the conflicts in Armenia and Azerbaijan, the instability in all of this, the ousting of democratic leaders, all of this intervention that affects Russia. And Russia, what do they have? And Trump actually mentioned this recently. Natural resources, vast, untapped natural resources, minerals that are essential into the next phase of technological development, AI, the fourth industrial revolution. And so when you look at all of that together, there's no way that a country so vast like Russia is not ever going to stop being in danger as long as the United States and Israel exist. Israel takes on the Middle East. The United States takes on Russia and China. And, Latin America is also clearly a target, as well as Africa, for these minerals. So there you go. This is not a change in the essence of our foreign policy. It is a continuation of it. And I unfortunately see that there is not that understanding by the non-aligned access, by the people of these countries that have been resisting US. There's an understanding of it, but there's also a belief that maybe this one time things will be different, whether it's, maybe now not with Latin America with Trump, but maybe with the next president that's a Democrat that's selected. We these changes don't really do much. So Um, I think that there will be a negotiation between Russia and the United States soon. I think that we're going to see that happen. There might be some pullback from Russia based on the latest attacks by Ukraine, because Ukraine has still been attacking Russia, has still been going after Russia, and people are obviously angry that this is happening, and Russia's just going to continue. But this is the closest we've seen to a resolution in the Ukraine conflict, and the United States doesn't need this anymore. And they're going to get rid of Zelensky will be ousted in one way or another, and Ukraine will be a democracy controlled by NATO and the US, but not obviously part of the alliance, because that is a red line for Russia. But really, what does it mean when it is essentially aligned, even though it's not official, right? So for me, I personally, humbly think that, I'm sorry, but that there is no deal with the United States in the form of what they're offering right now. Obviously, they have to make a deal of sorts, right? There's this You can't just fight forever. I mean, you could, but it's asking a lot of a country and of a leader and of a people. But there has been more money and aid sent to Ukraine. There's been sanctions placed on Russia still. All of that isn't going to go away right away. It's going to take some time. So even if we see a conclusion for this war, which I would love to see, it's I wouldn't be able to relax, because there's definitely something planned down the line, and things are not going to normalize as quickly as people would like to believe. So, yeah, that's just my take on all of this, and it's been an almost 2-hour show, and I'm so sorry for all the um, technological stuff and malfunctions and all of that. One other thing I have to say, this is very much nothing to do with anything, but Rockfin, where we usually stream, has been doing absolute horrible things to its creators. So we're still on there, but not going to be on there for very long. And in solidarity with everybody that's being shut out of that a platform that's had its followers removed. We're looking increasingly to more platforms as Elon Musk is having his desires for the Everything app. And obviously things are still in the works for that, but right now, we need to get out where we can, whether it's on X, Rumble, YouTube, for however long they decide to have us there. Censorship, again, is wrong, no matter what side of the aisle you stand on. And when the liberals did it, we called it out. But now, the conservatives want to jail and censor and deport anybody that doesn't align with their views. I mean, it's just as fascist, and there's no difference. I guess in closing, the things that are happening now are hugely a result of intelligence, US intelligence, UK intelligence, whether in the Middle East or whether what we're seeing also play out in Russia. And again, like, the majority of the people in the world might, make fun of us, Americans, and say, oh, that, they're dumb, they're self-centered, they're loud, all these things. But when it comes down to it, Hollywood has done such a good job, and so has propaganda, of still framing it as being redeemable. And I'm sorry, I think the people of the US have a chance, but our government, I think it's cooked. I think it's beyond cooked. And there is something that needs to be done, and that is the people need to take back the government. And you can interpret that as you like, but that's what needs to happen. So thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. I appreciate you for sticking with me, and please share this stream. And like I said, Vanessa Beeley will happen on Sunday or Monday. I'll have her back on. So thanks so much. See you next time on the Truth Wire.